From Los Angeles, the home of film and television, this is Film Music Live, a webcast featuring outstanding composers, orchestrators, filmmakers, and more from the world of music for film, television, and video games, talking about their work and answering your questions. Film Music Live is sponsored by the Film Music Network and Film Music Institute. And now the host of Film Music Live, Daniel Schweiger.
Hi everyone, I'm Daniel Schweiger, and welcome to Film Music Live, the show where you get to ask the questions to today's top composers. I'm happy to have you here. It's the end of the world, as Roland Emmerich knows it once again. Having spanned the galaxy for our roots in Stargate before having aliens crash dive the apocalypse for Independence Day, the German director now brings down the moon upon us in the Austrian company of HARALD KLOSER and Thomas Wander. Before Stargate sent Emmerich to the Hollywood stratosphere, KLOSER had scored Emmerich's 1999 VR film, The 13th Floor. He'd musically reteam with Emmerich to freeze most of the Earth over in The Day After Tomorrow, then flex his epic genre action muscles in such Emmerich films as 2012, 10,000 BC, White House Down, Independence Day Resurgence, Midway, and the Shakespearean mystery of Anonymous. KLOSER also broke completely different cinematic ground as a co-writer on 10,000 BC, 2012, and Moonfall. With his own background as a longtime collaborator with KLOSER on such films as Marlene and the Harmonists, as well as scoring TV's Buffy the Vampire Slayer, Thomas Wander has been a sturdy part of Emmerich and KLOSER's team when it comes to their melodic, adrenaline-filled scores, which now takes a giant Moonfall leap for unabashed entertainment with the kind of sci-fi disaster formula that this trio does like no one's business. With eerie electronics creating the threat of evil AI controlling a hollow moon that holds the seeds to humanity, KLOSER and Wander bring in thematic orchestral majesty, emotion, and patriotism for the human stories thrown into the Save the World fray, throttling music that leads to a climatic crosscut of epic proportions as heroic astronauts face untold danger as their loved ones on Earth outrace and outdodge moon debris and flying ships and skyscrapers, with all trying to save worlds from colliding. It's a scoring rocket that KLOSER and Wander light for Emmerich with entertaining energy to spare. And now let's welcome two musical masters of world-ending disaster, HARALD KLOSER and Thomas Wander. Welcome to On the Score.
Hi.
Well, it's great to have you here. And so I guess let's start. Tell us about your own musical backgrounds and how you first collaborated or have this partnership going on.
Well, I started with music from a very young age, actually. I learned to play the piano, played in various groups, like rock groups, pop groups. And then my main focus actually was going into jazz or fusion jazz. So I was really into Herbie Hancock, the Headhunters, or what was it? Joe Zawinul, Weather Report. And only when I think it was when I was around 15 where I noticed that music in movies could actually do something, or that was the first time when I heard music that evoked something in me, and that was, I think it was E.T., a couple of movies, E.T. and what was the other one? Once Upon a Time in America by Ennio Morricone. And from that point on, I tried to get to know as much as possible to know about what music does in film. And that's where my interest grew, actually, for film music. Yeah, well, later on, I did actually study, after school, I did study jazz piano. That was my main focus. And then when I was 21, I made the jump over to Los Angeles to USC and studied there the film scoring program. And yeah, and from there on, basically, I was in LA and tried to get as much work as I could. a few years after that, I got to know Harold, and we started our musical
Journey.
relationship.
Yeah, I almost have the same favorite scores. My whole life started also in small town Austria, looking up at the big screens and just in awe of John Williams. And but for me, it literally the score that lit my fuse was the Ennio Morricone score that Thomas just mentioned, Once Upon a Time in America. That just hit me in a place where I knew this is going to be a destiny here. And my journey was a little different. I played in bands. I early on started realizing that I am not a good enough singer to be a rock star. So I had to kind of team up with other guys who actually were rock stars or aspiring rock stars. And so I was fortunate enough to have some collaborations with, very successful people at that time in Germany. One of them, Klaus Lage, who was a very successful maker of like politically relevant German rock music. I don't know how that sounds for you right now, but but and then also later, we got to work with Falco, who people know for his hit "Rock Me Amadeus." And so my journey into the studio for film scoring was more through pop music writing, producing pop music. And when we moved to LA, very early on, somebody introduced me to this young kid who had just finished the UCLA film music program. And that was the day when Thomas walked into my studio.
A very fortuitous meeting. And how did you first team up with Roland Emmerich?
Well, Harold, I think that's yours.
Yeah, well, Roland has been a long time friend of mine, long before we collaborated. His sister and my then wife were actually friends, and they kind of decided that Roland's sister decided that Roland and I would get along well, and so we went for a couple of coffees and drinks. And my career was kind of knocking on doors to maybe possibly score a movie of the week or a little TV series or something. And, while I was at dinner at coffee with Roland, he was telling me about, shooting this movie Stargate. And, one of my lowliest moments was when I don't know if Thomas remembers this. We were just scoring one of our first little movies of the week for an English production. It was then called A Further Gesture. And we were struggling. And at the same time, when I went to take a coffee with Roland, I saw on the newsstand, Roland Emmerich, biggest movie of all time, Independence Day. So it was quite a big barrier between us, other than as friends. Roland and I were always friends, and at some point, he said, "Why don't you do a demo?" And then Thomas and I did a first demo for The Day After Tomorrow.
Now, I want to give a big shout out to Film Tracks Records. They're going to give us downloads, 5 downloads for the first 5 questions. And we've got our first one up from Louis Versalini. And I think this kind of distinguishes all of your scores together, at least when it comes to disaster. What are some of the key ingredients needed when scoring disaster movies, and what are some of the challenges?
Thomas.
Well, the key ingredients, well, a disaster movie almost always there is a big epic showdown. So you obviously need music that reflects that kind of epic scale, the epic images. But you know, there is no rule to how to score a big disaster film. So I'm not sure. Harold?
Well, as much as I could say is when we start something like this, we're kind of like a special team in a way, right? I don't think something like Thomas and me exists anywhere else, because I have over the years really transitioned a lot into writing scripts and producing these movies that we have been scoring over the years. So as much as we both started, sitting in a studio and basically having all our four hands sometimes on the same keyboard writing, over the years, it's become this understanding of how to approach a film, and so it's it's become just a different process. We always start with talking about the structure, and it's almost like I always compare it with, like, okay, we have to cook a meal, and now at the very beginning Thomas and I talk about the ingredients. We say, we've done small movies where we decided, the ingredients are very, very sparse instruments and sparse tools, like almost like an artist when you decide to draw with watercolors or pencil. And sometimes, obviously, as Thomas has mentioned, in these movies, you somewhere always end up in a big epic situation. The question is how you get there and how you hold back, and what the stuff in between is that holds it all together.
So, I mean, obviously that really makes you unique. Again, there are very few composers who are actually, just as busy as a screenwriter, and also in Moonfall, you're a producer on the film as well. So I guess, Harold, like after freezing the Earth, blowing up half of the Earth in the ID4 sequel, and then literally shifting the entire tectonic plate of the Earth in 2012, is it difficult? Okay, what can we do to the Earth next? I mean, as one of the screenwriters of Moonfall, how did you? Okay, well, let's have the moon crash. How did you even come up with the idea?
Well, the idea came up during the shooting of Independence Day, the Resurgence, when Roland basically slipped me on a dinner while we were shooting. He slipped me this little book. And I only wrote the title. It was one of those books that look a little esoteric and wacky. And I only looked at the title, and it said, "Who built the moon?" And I looked at it, remember, over dinner, and Roland said, "Hey, there's a movie in there, trust me." And I just that title was so invoking of who built the moon? Excuse me, what are they just saying? And so that was the road to Moonfall. Was, well, what if the moon is not what we think it is? And from there on, it was a lot of fun to come up with the story.
One thing I noticed is that this actually kind of has science in it. I mean, you seem to have done your homework on the scientific angle. Was that important to kind of give it some kind of veracity or just logic, when you've got this kind of premise?
Well, the people would argue with you if there's real science in it. We usually get rewarded the award for the most bogus kind of science. But you're right, there is science in it. But the science kind of serves as a scaffolding for the story in a way. I always say I would sacrifice science for story. And then obviously there's other movies and other genres that cannot sacrifice science for story.
Our next question is from Jake Wright. And again, this is something that I think really distinguishes Roland's films and why they're so enjoyable, is that you always kind of pit this cosmic event with what's happening down on Earth, especially in this. And Jake would love to know, I love the film because of the score. How do you create a score that is both emotional and action-packed?
Now, that's a Thomas question.
Well, as Harold mentioned before, the first thing we talk about is the sonic landscape. What do we want to hear? What kind of sounds do we want to hear? And that we don't even talk about themes or motives. It's just the overall color of the film, of the music for the film. And usually the way it works is we read the script. Well, Harold sends me the script. I read the script. I start to gather ideas. I fool around a little bit, make some demos. Then I send these ideas over to Harold. We talk about it. And by the time he goes to the shoot and starts shooting the movie, like a couple of days after the first shoot, I receive the first edits, and then we try, do these ideas actually work to the picture? Do they make sense? And if they do, that's good. Then they can be developed into something else that's maybe leads to some other places. Sometimes we find out ideas didn't go so well to that particular scene or for the whole movie, and from there on, actually, it's step by step, going through the movie, finding the right, finding the tone.
And it's also obviously the super advantage that Thomas and I have like this is, I'm basically coming home after shooting day 4, and I say we shot this scene, and Thomas had sent me a little demo or a little, experimental cue with these. Most of the time those cues in the beginning are featuring the more extreme ideas maybe that we have when we think this could be the texture. So if we say, oh, let's use these kinds of sounds or sound designy elements even that can be tuned or not, usually those first cues are more out there, and that's the time to maybe try something really new. And then the really cool thing is that I can take the dailies, go into editorial, tell the editor, hey, just cut this scene really quickly together. I need to know for Thomas and me if our approach is gonna work with this or that cue or sketch or whatever you might call these sound files that usually Thomas kind of creates very early on. And I get to play with and to do my thing with, and so we also kind of find out early on what does not work, which is the big advantage of being in the production team, right?
I mean, one thing I really love about Roland's movies, and you guys have certainly done different genres. Again, I'm a huge fan of Midway, and I absolutely love Anonymous, wonderful film. Again, the thing, it's interesting that this and Jackass both open because they're both movies that give you exactly what you go in to see, and they totally deliver exactly what you want to go see. So in that respect, Sachin Danan has a question. When you were scoring Moonfall, how much of the space sci-fi movie cliches did you want to embrace in terms of the score and the sonic palette? And having done films of a similar genre prior to this, how does the process of creating a new template go for you guys? Like, again, you kind of have the markers in this of like, okay, we're going to make a speech, someone's going to jump over a bridge, these kind of real hallmark moments that you expect from a Roland Emmerich movie.
Well, I think the most interesting, well, the ingredients, obviously the ingredients are as I said before, we tend to use orchestra, big orchestra, for the big epic scenes. But the more challenging situation, I think, was how does it sound when we go into space? How does it sound when we go? I'm not sure if I'm allowed to say what.
At this point, you're allowed to say.
Okay. How does it sound in the moon? How does it feel being in there? How do the characters feel? How do you translate that into into music? And what kind of sonic palette do you use? And there were a few approaches that I tried, and some of them survived, some of them did not. And yeah, that was basically the main challenge for Moonfall: how to make the space sound in music.
I really loved in the film was see these really cool electronic effects. There's this really kind of cool chopping motif that you have in the great sequence where the space shuttle escapes the Poseidon Adventure Way, which brings us to Esteban Cortez's question. How much of the score is electronic music and how much is orchestral music and how much is in between there in the course of Moonfall?
Well, that is our secret sauce in a way, right? That's the grandmother's recipe. Where does the sauce start? Where does the meat come in, and where does the butter? Where is the butter needed to blend it all together? But obviously, if you mention the shuttle launch, we also have to say it's not only Thomas and me. We also have other collaborators who create fabulous, synthetic, dense sound elements for us, and then Thomas gets to use those and weave them into his orchestral compositions. And a little bit the secret is how they all blend together in a way that it's not, oh, here this is this and now it's this and now it becomes this, I would say. But Thomas, how do you see it?
Yeah, that's basically how I see it. And I mean, I'm not sure exactly what the question was. How he wanted to know how much of the score is orchestral and how much of the score is electronic. I wouldn't know by the minutes, but whenever you hear an orchestra, it's an orchestra with, I'm certain there are electronic elements in it. And then there are long stretches of score where there is no orchestra in it. That's solely done with electronic elements. But I wouldn't know how much minutes each.
On this movie also, we had a little bit an understanding. Even the editorial team kind of was encouraged to, as a producer, I had the freedom to go in and say, guys, do not put any music here. Try to do whatever you want to do with electronic sounds, with some kind of a sound design. And then we will take that and work it into our music, or we'll create that kind of, segue into where the orchestra can come in and take over, where suddenly then it's a big event if you actually locate a high string, and then that does exactly hit you in the heart at that moment. But it doesn't come out of nowhere. It comes out of an emotional sound wall, or however you want to call it, sound composition that is already there and building up to that one start or that one orchestral highlight that then begins to evolve.
Now, again, because of the unique position that you're in, this is a question from Ivan Sorokin, and he would like to know, do you ever have a situation when the director doesn't want music for a scene and you think that the scene must have music, or maybe a director, or maybe Roland, wants music, but you don't think the scene should be scored?
Well, Thomas and I can attest to that. That if it happens the other way around. Like Thomas and I go like, no, this shouldn't have music, right? This has to play dry. And I go like, yeah, I think you're right. I'm gonna make sure Roland understands that. And then usually Thomas gets a little file from me or a little layout and saying, well, this is actually kind of what Roland wants to have, at least a little something here or this or that. So it's maybe more us than because at some point as the filmmaker you come into this flow and you just feel you want the movie just to hand it off and it's also a kind of a genre that we're working with, right? You cannot go into a movie like Moonfall and have a string quartet service this movie, no matter what you do.
How did you want to kind of, one thing I really love about the film is how it kind of gets into Stargate territory in the last third of it. You've got this fantastic shot of like the white dwarf in the moon. How did you want the music to kind of solve the mystery, if you were, and to kind of go into this whole cosmic, this is how humankind was created thing, score-wise?
I let Thomas answer that because my first attempt at that actually was quite a failure, and then Thomas kind of came in and did it his way, and then that made it all. I thought it would be more more non-distinct, more sounds only, and then. Thomas kind of just found that fantastic tone of, making it synthetic but big at the right places. That's one of my favorite things. That's a compliment to Thomas.
Thank you. Are you guys talking about the big sequence in the end when they're explaining?
Well, just in general, how the tone of it, how it becomes much more of a science fiction film, as it were. Once we find out the secret origin of why the moon is hollow and this past race of people and their Death Stars, or not Death Stars, but flying across the universe.
Yeah, I mean, the approach, we tried many approaches. And on the outset, we tried to do it synthetic or electronic and not, as Harold said, not so distinct. But that didn't work for some reason. So I think you need something. You cannot do only sound design or sound designy landscapes. There still needs to be some musical element in it where you can hold on to, that carries you through from scene to scene, that actually forms an arc. And that, I think that's only possible with musical language, with melodies, with harmonies, and sound design alone, I think, would not be able to achieve that.
One thing I really like about the film as well is the character of Casey, and the early trailer just makes him kind of look as goofy comic relief in the way that kind of nerds are usually portrayed in films. But what's interesting in this is that he's he kind of realizes his limitations, his way, his issues. But again, he's actually really the hero at the end of this movie. How did you kind of want the score to reflect that kind of distinctive hero, where he's not like the dashing astronaut, as a character?
Thomas?
Well, yeah, I mean, of course, he gives himself up, but so the music had to play. Well, on the one side, it was heroic, but it was also basically his dream come true. He got to get into space, and not only that, he got to go inside the moon. So you play his excitement for it, and of course he sacrifices himself for it. and that's reflected in the score as well. But yeah, that's you make him heroic by I don't know, by playing the emotion that he probably felt while going up there.
But I think as they say, it all starts with the writing. And in that case, Harold, was when you're writing that character who could have really been an annoying, like so many of these characters are in films, was that like as a screenwriter, like okay, we're not going to go for this cliche. We're going to make this a really well-rounded character. Because again, that's to me one of the really surprising strengths of the film is Casey's character.
Yeah, I mean, he was always our little favorite because he's the ultimate underdog. Who doesn't like the underdog? Who doesn't like the chubby guy to prevail and to be right? And he's just a genuinely good human being. And so it it was actually a little bit of a problem at some point for the other actors, when they realized that the movie was not going to end with the Patrick Wilson character being the big hero of the day, but it was this weak, anxious character who's gonna save the day. But at the same time, obviously, that gave Thomas and me a chance to really, do one of those things that I think we've come to work really well on, an epic emotional music piece that touches people in their hearts somehow.
So we have a question from Dale. Thomas, what kind of things did you glean from studying film composition at USC, and were Marco Beltrami and Christoph Beck among your classmates?
Yes, they actually were. I think we were 19 during that class, and well, Marco was a classmate, and Chris was a classmate. Actually, we were roommates then for a few years. Chris and I and some other guys, we worked together on TV shows as ghostwriters in the very beginning, and yeah, and we're still in touch actually.
Oh, very cool. But just in terms of going to school there, what did you think of the whole experience?
Oh, you see, that was brilliant. It was an intense year. Really, well, you probably don't have one free minute, but I've learned so much there in terms of how to translate emotion into music, how to work under deadlines, under stress, and since we had to do all by ourselves, even writing the scores by hand and writing the parts for the musicians by hand, then going on to a scoring stage and recording that piece every week. That was phenomenal. It was an amazing experience. Yeah.
Now, Harold, my appreciation of your music and when I first met you was way back for this really fantastic German movie called The Harmonist, about the real life comedian Harmonist. Tell me a bit how about that score again. It's an absolutely wonderful film that I wish people would see.
Well, that's a historic moment for me, because that was the first time actually this young kid who just had finished the USC film school program. I met him, and he did a fantastic orchestration of a theme that we had for the Harmonists, was called Comedian Harmonist. Then a really lovely piece that, once Thomas got his hands on, I was like, oh my God, this guy is really good. I want to work with him forever. And that's basically what happened.
But I guess, Harold, in terms of scoring the film, like how did you want to score a movie essentially about musicians whose voice was silenced, and just to kind of capture this enormity of what was going on that they really weren't aware of, but suddenly starts to claim members of the group?
Well, in a film like that, obviously, you're working with an already the movie is about a German a cappella singing group, so the composer also benefits of the emotional impact of all those original songs. And so the score actually really had to focus on the emotional impact of the politics on these people. The main job of, you know, the upbeat and the wonderful stuff that was happening to them was serviced by the songs of this group, and then the task of the score was actually to bring in this element of, oh, you know, this is the time now where you know, the German Nazis are coming to power, and this is just the whole, like, this whole brown bad element sauce is seeping into the lives of these young people, and it's going to tear them apart. It's going to tear their friendship apart. So the Comedian Harmonist score is a very emotional, very I would almost say one-sidedly sad and emotional score, because the happy parts are actually, you know, serviced by the happy songs those guys were singing.
Now, again, you know, Roland has done many films, and again, some of them are actually quite different. And I have to say, maybe what I consider the best movie he's ever directed is Anonymous, which is essentially who actually was William Shakespeare. What was it like scoring such kind of like a left turn kind of movie for Harold, and again, kind of creating a more modern sound for the Shakespearean era?
We moved to Berlin together into an apartment, Thomas and I, and we were kind of, when we were doing our talking about the ingredients, it became pretty clear that we also had to visit some ancient, you know, instruments. And it was a little bit of a longer searching process, and Thomas was also able to still infuse some of the, you know, the more modern sounds. And I mean, it was quite an experience. I almost forgot that part. We were both in different rooms, one of the few times where we actually were, you know, running in and out of each other's set up rooms, writing rooms, and playing stuff for each other. But in the end, it turned out very emotional and very, very nicely. I'm very happy about that score. No, Thomas, how do you feel?
Yeah, the same. I mean, the great thing for me, at least, with Anonymous was that it allowed me to explore a different kind of music with different harmonic structures and different instruments. And the challenge was then to use these instruments and the musical vocabulary and somehow work it into a score that works today, that works for the movie. Otherwise, you could have just taken period music and put it in the movie, but that didn't obviously work. So that was the big challenge and the great opportunity to explore different instruments.
Now, another film score that you guys did I thought was really pretty terrific was Midway. And one thing I particularly liked about that movie and the score was how well it interplayed with all the sound effects. And you guys are always dealing with gigantic sound effects in so much of what you do for Roland. And I particularly loved the sequences in the big battle, how the planes would just dive, and then literally at the last second pull up. And the way you capture that sensation of just a plane just literally almost seeming to go in this kamikaze run and then get right out of there. What were the challenges of doing those sequences?
Thomas?
I believe that actually was a piece that survived as an early sketch. That for some reason Harold had the idea to put it over that scene, and it did work. Obviously, it needed some reworking, but the basic material was there, was composed or written even before any picture, before anything was shot. I believe, if I'm not
Yeah.
mistaken.
And then obviously there were build-ups to that. Midway was maybe one of the better examples where the score could start in an almost undefinable land of, is this now sound effects or are these stylized sound effects, who slowly become tonal and become music, and then obviously rhythmic, elements of drums or synthetic rhythms kick in, and then basically lay the foundation for really this huge moment. Then when actually the orchestra kicks in, it's like a yay moment that you feel, okay, you're going with this, and it's building and it's big. It's almost like a wave. It's something is coming and coming, and then you kind of, while you don't even feel it, you've entered this sound effect to become a drone and to become tonal and to maybe then become part of a chord. And then, the big orchestra starts taking over and takes it home.
It's interesting that there's a very American quality to Roland's movies. They just feel like you can write down to someone standing in front of a platform and delivering a speech, whether it's about beating the aliens or we're going to send a space shuttle up to save the Earth. And also, again, in Midway, which is essentially about patriotism, is two Austrians and, a German director. Is that difficult? What does America mean to you, especially like in terms of a blockbuster movie? And how do you think that you capture that quality, for, being people who aren't, born here?
I don't know. You guys already liked The Sound of Music that came also from Austria, I guess, right? Or had some Austrian elements. It's a hard question to answer. But I think neither Thomas or I or even Roland are looking at the patriotic side of it so much as more like the human spirit, that speech that's happening in every classroom, in every, everybody who has to climb a mountain, or everybody who is the underdog who has to rise up to a crazy task. Some great guy somewhere says, okay, guys, listen up. We didn't come here to lose. We're going to do this. What else are we going to do if we turn around? We haven't tried. Like, all those fantastic things that make us humans able to do amazing stuff. These movies just kind of at some point all come to that crossroads of where people need to make that decision. And then there's usually a guy there who voices it. And then Thomas can kick in with some great horn and chords and progressions that just make that hit the heart.
This movie was completely, if I'm wrong, it was completely done during the pandemic, and it's almost astounding how you pulled this whole thing off, given what's going on. Well, again, Harold is a producer on this. What were the difficulties? How did you surmount them?
Harold, during the shoot?
During the shoot, the difficulties were almost insurmountable. Canada was in a lockdown, curfew. The police would stop you on the street to and from the studio. Everybody had to wear masks and goggles, and most of the people were behind plexiglass. It was many times a feeling like the situation in the studio does not reflect at all what we're trying to bring to the screen. This kind of light-hearted, inspirational story of, a guy who nobody believes kind of saves the earth story, which maybe made it even more, a labor of love. And then obviously with Thomas in another country, completely disconnected, it was really hard. It was really hard. And don't forget, while we were shooting this film, and while I was maybe on with Thomas on working on some, score ideas, or even only talking about them, the politics that surrounded us were like surreal on a whole other level. It was, KC, the dude was, walking into the shuttle, and when Roland called cut, 90% of the film team was, glued to their iPhones and said, "Oh, they're storming the Capitol now."
Oh boy.
Like,
January 6th. Yeah.
What are we gonna do? Should we keep shooting? Or we have to keep shooting. Nobody's gonna pay us the over. Like, how, it was very surreal. That whole part of it was very surreal. And
again, this is a movie about bringing people together. I mean, just musically, how did this all come together? Because it sounds terrific. I mean, how did you get the performance, and where was it recorded?
Well, that Thomas recorded it in Vienna.
Yeah, I was lucky enough that the recording dates fell right before Omicron hit, and right after the summer. So the numbers were the COVID numbers were down, and they lifted most of the restrictions. And I recorded the score in Vienna. They had I think it's one of the 3 biggest halls to record orchestras in it. So there were no restrictions in regards to how many musicians can be in that hall at the same time. Of course, they had to be spaced a little bit differently, but other than that, the actual recording of the score with the orchestra didn't suffer too much. Well, there was the obvious having masks in the control room, and that was a little bit of pain, but it was doable. So,
how many players did you have?
I think we had about close to 85 or 90 musicians. We had a big brass section, really big brass section. The usual string section is probably around 50 strings and woodwinds. So it must be somewhere between 80 and 90.
Yeah, and again, I love the vocal quality of the score as well, especially which really kind of comes in to represent the whole alien nature. You get some absolutely beautiful, again, female voices in it.
Thank you. Yeah, what I try to do is have an element that's otherworldly, but still has a human quality to it, or a quality that's familiar. There is some familiarity to it, but you don't quite know what it is and what it could be. And I think with voices, they were obviously mangled and processed, but I think that worked out really well. And you still could detect that it's actually a human voice.
No, it sounds awesome. And of course, this ends with a little bit of a cliffhanger. What do you already have a potential sequel mapped out, or wherever the story is going to go?
The story always continues. Where it's going to go, we don't know yet. We have a few other things we're working on. I always believe to mention them too early is a jinx. So, but we're going to keep busy, keep learning, keep getting better, and hopefully never stop telling stories and touching hearts.
And again, I guess to wrap it up, there's a cue in the soundtrack that really kind of, just the title sums it all up. It's called Ludicrous Mode. And
Yeah.
I do think there's like at this point, even though there's a real sense of humor and fun that you guys kind of know exactly the kind of ride that Roland and you, the ride that you're going to take the audience on. Is that just part of the fun of kind of delivering again what the audiences are going to see these movies for?
Right.
Thomas, is it fair to say not a Tesla driver? So
Yeah, no.
he at first didn't know what does that even mean, ludicrous mode, man. but once he kind of caught up on it, he really loved it, and he hit it out of the park, that one.
Well, Harold and Thomas, I just want to thank you both so much for joining us at Film Music Live. Moonfall is now in theaters. I urge everyone to see it in IMAX because that is the only way this should be experienced. Harold and Thomas' score is available on Film Tracks Records, and I want to give a big thanks to Mark Northam, our producer Dale Turner, Mark Banning, Jim Barn, Dan Goldwasser at ScoringSessions.com, and Film Tracks Records. And I will see you on the next Film Music Live, Monday the 14th, as Cliff Martinez surveils Steven Soderbergh's Kimi. Thank you all for joining us.
Thanks for having us.
Thank you.